Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Johansson. I am the Associate Director for Adult Learning Initiatives here at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. And I am joined by my absolutely fabulous colleague, Dallas Kratzer, who will introduce himself. And we are really excited for you to join us for our second webinar in our series about understanding credit for prior learning. I hope that you were able to maybe join us live last month for our first session on why on earth should I care about credit for prior learning, or maybe you caught the recording, or maybe you're just joining us for the series now. If you are joining us for the first time, this is a great place to join us because today we're going to be really unpacking credit for prior learning and talking a little bit more about what it is. But before I get into the agenda, Dallas, go ahead and tell us about yourself for all the folks online that may not know you.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. You are always so kind to me. I appreciate it. You really build me up more than but Dallas Kratzer, I've been kind of swimming in this pool for 20 some years now and thoroughly enjoy it, helping post-traditional learners to complete their undergraduate degree or go on and pursue a master's degree. I do a couple of different things. I'm a senior fellow at CPE. I am also with the Kentucky Department of Veteran Affairs. We do a lot of stuff and not only helping veterans, but all things military at the commission. And we're hosting a symposium in 2 days to help employers understand how to hire veterans, but also to connect employers with the fact that they can complete their degree. Their veteran or military connected individuals can complete their degree through workplace learning and their military credit. So those are some of the things I do. I think the next slide maybe has the discussion about the CAEL conference that was just last week.
Well, first, let me just take us through the agenda, and then we'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit about CAEL.
Yeah.
So today, Dallas and I are going to go through, we obviously just did introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about the CAEL conference that just took place. And then we're going to really dive into what is credit for prior learning. You may know credit for prior learning by its previous pronouns of PLA or prior learning assessment. So we're going to really unpack what does that term mean now, and what are all the ways you may have encountered it at your institution, and talk about potential students, the impact of it, and why the urgency. And then we'll wrap up with some next steps about what is coming next for us, and how you can sort of stay up to date with that. But all that to say, Dallas, let's talk about the CAEL conference.
I had a fantastic opportunity to co-present with Barbara Kent, who was from EKU. She's now with Purdue Global. But while she was at EKU, we developed this idea of a military ecosystem or veteran ecosystem for colleges. It was great, well received. The CAEL conference is an annual conference where folks who are invested or interested in credit for prior learning and post-traditional learners can get together and talk. And CAEL has also moved out, the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning, they've moved into the workforce area because there's true linkage between education and workforce. And we need to build those relationships so that we can share information about what do future employees need and how can current and future students meet those needs so that our workforce continues to grow and to expand. And in the military community, it's even more significant because the interesting thing about military individuals is if they've been in the military and ACE has evaluated their credit for prior learning, they are in that bucket of some college, no degree. And it's pretty easy to help accelerate them through that. That's what Barbara and I were talking about. I would highly encourage anyone that has not been to the CAEL conference to go at least one time to check it out and see what's going on. So many discussions on what is CPL, how is CPL, how could we do CPL, why is it important? This year was in Baltimore, which was okay. Crab cakes are always a good thing. But next year it's going to be in New Orleans, and they'll be celebrating their 50th anniversary. So
probably some more crab, I imagine.
Yeah. Just lots of stuff. It's going to be over Halloween Day, so that should make it really
wow. What a fun time to be in New Orleans for sure.
Yeah. But this ecosystem that we talked about is something that we've been working on in Kentucky for a while, going from just military friendly to military ready. And military ready meaning not only do we like veterans, but we have got our degree programs matching their military workplace learning so that we can accelerate their degree completion.
And as you'll see as we go through the presentation today, military affiliated learners, but specifically transitioning military members, are a critical audience for credit for prior learning policies, engaging them and helping them transition smoothly into post-secondary education as they exit the military, but it's certainly not the only audience for credit for prior learning. There is a sort of particular set of policy questions or procedure questions when it comes to transitioning military service members and how we think about the way that their learning is documented. That might be a bit different than the way that, you know, other folks coming from the workforce have documented experience. So we're going to talk about how to really unpack that and what that means for credit for prior learning that might be different than other kinds of credit for prior learning. Certainly something we're really interested here in Kentucky, thinking about how can we really dial in on this and better support from a post-secondary education lens our transitioning service members.
Right. And before we move on from this slide, you know, you can take that military, veteran and military services hub and put any affinity group in there. How do we work this same hub for justice involved with rural communities? How do we work this with industry? So this is just the tip of the iceberg of a bigger ecosystem for CPL.
I love that. Such a good point. Such a good point. And we're really excited at the council also to be thinking about what it means to support our incarcerated students with the expansion of Pell Grants this year. Obviously, a lot of new opportunities for our folks that are in our jails and prisons. So I'm really excited to think about how we can really better structure supports for those individuals and make those opportunities available as well. But that is a different webinar for another day.
Right.
Today, we're going to focus on credit for prior learning. So I'm going to take us back to something that we covered in our last webinar, just to make sure that we're all starting on the same page as we think about understanding what credit for prior learning is, and we should always start with the definition. So Dallas, maybe tell us why you've chosen this one and walk us through it.
Well, it's because it's the one that CAEL uses, and CAEL is the lead organization in the nation or internationally on what's going on for credit for prior learning. Now, previously they had used prior learning assessment, but that is part of what credit for prior learning is. And really, during the conference, somebody made the point that we could take the prior off of there and just make it credit for learning, and that makes sense too, because we just don't learn in the past. We can be in an academic program and be learning in another arena at the same time. Plus, as we see, this umbrella of CPL covers a lot of things. That's why it starts with various methods, and that it's for colleges and universities and training providers so that we can evaluate learning and see how it occurs outside the workplace or outside in the workplace, not just in the traditional academic environment. And the key here is that learning is important, but not all learning is college equivalent or college worthy, college credit worthy, but it's valuable. It could be used to scaffold some other opportunities that then could be college credit worthy.
Such a good point. And I like to think of CPL as really, I think, Dallas, you maybe even framed it to me this way of, you know, evaluating college level learning that occurs outside the classroom, right? So we're looking for that demonstration of knowledge, skills gained at the college level outside the classroom. So that could be in the workplace, that could be in the military, that could be in other education institutions. Lots of ways that this could be taking place. And that really moves us into the next slide very well, where we think about this. And I think on the last webinar I mentioned, and I'll just mention it again here for folks that weren't able to join us, it helps me to think about sort of two lenses on credit for prior learning. One, where the institution itself is evaluating the learning that has taken place by an individual, and then determining what college credit is appropriate based on their evaluation of the learning. And then there's another type of CPL essentially where there's a third party that's doing the evaluation of the learning. That's not the institution. The institution is just sort of taking the results of that evaluation and determining what college credit should be awarded for that. So if you think about credit by exam, something like that, that is an example where a third party is assessing the learning, right? They've developed an instrument and they're assessing the learning. And then the job of the institution is to say, okay, great, we have this result from this instrument developed by a third party. We are going to say, what we believe is the college credit worthiness of the results of that exam, versus something like a individual assessment or a portfolio or an institutional exam, where the institution is doing both the assessment of the learning of the individual and the determination of what credit should be awarded. And military credit, interestingly, kind of falls in the middle with the two different parts of the transcript. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but that is just sort of one lens on this slide that has really helped me think about the different phases of CPL. But Dallas, what else do you want to highlight here?
I think you've really covered a lot of it, and we're going to step through this. The thing to remember is that umbrella of CPL, it covers a wide range, and many schools are doing it. They just don't realize that's what it's called. And that's where that first block is, that's transfer credit. That's prior learning. If you've learned at another institution, you're bringing it in. That is under the umbrella of credit for prior learning.
I think it's so interesting also when you think about it this way, because things like AP exams, that's also a demonstration of credit for prior learning.
That's right.
A DSST exam, a CLEP exam, all of that are really classic examples of credit for prior learning that maybe we don't think about, because again, those are instances where a third party is doing the assessment of the learning. Either if you're a transfer student, the other institution assessed your learning, or if you're taking these exams, right, the third party assessed it. But again, really classic examples of credit for prior learning, just sort of different, a little bit different in kind than when the institution is assessing the learning themselves.
Right. And so the point here is actually all of our schools in Kentucky, all of our colleges and universities in Kentucky are doing some type of CPL. We want to make that a point of awareness first. So really all we're trying to do is expand what we're doing, not creating a new system, not introducing a new program, but to expand on what we're already doing.
And I think also one thing that we're really interested in helping our institutions do is scale these programs. So things like AP exams, transfer credit, CLEP exams, DSST exams, those tend to be, because they are assessed outside the institution, they're really standardized across an institution. You're not going to get a different answer usually when you go into an institution about what credit you'll get for a score on something like that. But that tends not to be the case when we talk about things like portfolios or challenge exams or things like that. There can definitely be different practices in different areas of the institution. And we have a lot of universities and colleges in the state that are doing really excellent things, but maybe not consistently. So I think this is an area that we're really excited to help, just bring awareness to what the really strong practices are and help folks that are interested progress in consistency of practice.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and jump into this and start dicing this up a little bit.
You got it.
All right. So one of the very first points that we want to make about this is there is good policy and guidance on how we handle transfer credit and how we award credit. When we recognize credit for prior learning, we're not giving away credit. We're recognizing learning that has happened somewhere else. And ACRO and CHIA, ACE, they have come together with this standardized transfer and award of credit. And in that, there need to be standards for evaluating and awarding that credit. That's the number one priority that they have. The credit award decisions must be applied consistently. And that's one of those breakdown points, Amanda, that we have. So many different ways to do that, and yet we need to have it more consistent through the state. This is a challenge I see nationally. We talked about it at KO last week. As I've gone out to other colleges and universities across the country, I see this. Everyone is struggling with how do we apply this consistently. And then their third policy is policies should aim to maximize the amount of credit applied. In that, some people misunderstand that, saying, well, we're just going to give away a bunch of credit. No, what we want to do is we want to maximize the credit that has happened. This is particularly important with the military credit recommendations, because here is what happens. As a service member, when your workplace learning and your training courses are evaluated, that learning has been documented, and it becomes a waste of taxpayers' money if we make them take courses over again. All right. So we want to maximize what's been recognized by ACE and is a recommendation in our programs so that we save time, GI Bill money, taxpayer money. A lot of pieces go into that pie, and it's just being a good steward of what the federal government has done to help our service members and to accelerate degree completion.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about that, because you just said
Mhm.
degree completion, and I think that's a really good point here. That is a hallmark of, I think, a really mature credit for prior learning program, because
Sure,
I think
yes.
it's also not sufficient to just say, okay, great, you have, we're going to give you or recognize your learning with this type of generic elective credit.
Right.
I think looking at, if I could revise this statement, I would make sure to include that it is maximizing the progress towards degree as much as appropriate, because I think it's dangerous when we look at credit for prior learning as something that we award and recognize, but does not actually help the student in
Mhm.
helping them make progress towards their degree. So I think it's
Great
really
point.
worth thinking about how different credit for prior learning opportunities satisfy what type of degree requirements, right? Is it really a general education requirement? Is it an elective requirement? Is there an opportunity for upper division credit for prior learning? And
Mhm.
what does that really take? And what would really be required? And are there maybe degree programs where that's really optimized and appropriate for students? Because I think this is someplace where folks maybe think that they're offering a lot, but I think maybe taking that opportunity to say, okay, is this actually um, reducing the time that students need to spend towards degree? And again, all where appropriate, where it matches the curriculum, where it
That's
matches the
right.
learning outcomes. I'm not suggesting that just because students come in with learning that we should, be propelling them inappropriately towards their degree, but where there is true alignment, we have to make sure that we are not just awarding elective credit, but really looking at the degree requirements and making sure that students are moving through those where they've demonstrated the mastery.
Right. And this is no different than what we do when transcripts comes from other institutions to us. We look at it, we evaluate it. Sometimes we'll ask for the syllabi to help us to better understand it. It's the same thing here. We should do that. We should never depreciate the depth, breadth, and rigor of the courses we're teaching to award credit for prior learning. That is not the intent. It should be equivalent. And as we do that, understanding that equivalency doesn't mean they have to get 100%, because they don't get 100% in our classrooms. All right. We need to be about the 80%. Some would say 70 to 80%. I like the 80% a little bit better, only because I'm a little conservative in that way. I want to make sure that the learning is really there, because we don't want to set our students up for failure. And if we recognize credit that does not meet the depth, breadth, and rigor that we have in our classrooms, and they go to the next iteration of that course, they could be set up for failure because they don't have the learning to be ready for that next level. So, this is why I really hammer home the point. We recognize learning, we don't give credit, because yeah, we can give away the store, but that's not the intent here. We should never depreciate what we're doing in the classroom. So the fourth
Spoken
one,
like someone that has interacted with faculty on this topic, Dallas, I think it's worth highlighting because it's a common concern that we encounter when we're talking to folks on our campuses about credit
sure.
for prior learning, is really how are we protecting the integrity of
Mhm.
the level of rigor that we teach and that we require, right? So
Right.
I think it's worth underscoring. But sorry, let's talk about this fourth
Well,
point.
now that you've said that, this is the thing. You and I go back and forth with this stuff so much. There's so much information to share. So it's exciting. And you've kicked open a door that I want to walk into. Okay. And that is faculty drive the bus on this. All right. We have to have faculty buy in. But many faculty have not heard how CPL is done or should be done. And once they do, they go, oh, okay. So we're not just saying, okay, here you go. Here's a bucket of cash, if you will. No, we're saying they've done the work. Let's just recognize that. All right. And the fourth policy, here we go. policies and practices must be reasonable, transparent, and easily understood for not only the staff, the faculty, and the student. During the conference last week, can't tell you how many folks said, you know what, I went and looked at our website on how we handle credit for prior learning, and I'm not sure I could even apply for it because I couldn't figure it out. And one person even talked about, it said to go see this person, and then when you go to the website and they talk about it, they say to go see this person who's the same person who told me to come and see them. So that is not clear and it's not transparent. So we need to work on that.
Yeah, it's definitely, this is a good place where you can think about just a quick process map. What does it actually look like from a student's perspective to try and do this? And that will tell you a lot about where your institution is with this. And it also may be that not all of the options we mentioned on the previous slide are offered by your institution, and they might just not be there yet, but certainly they offer something. And having clarity and transparency to students about what that is and how they go about doing that is really important.
Sure.
And not just students, but also making sure that information is clear to the faculty and staff on your campus.
Exactly. All right. I think we're ready to move. There are going to be a few more here. There are 8 in total. Institutions need to remove the obstacles. That goes without saying. We just talked about that and how sometimes we make it hard to figure this whole thing out. And not only that, number 6, what ACRO made a big point here is, it's not denied based on where it's coming from or what the accrediting agency is. Because even in some institutions, I'm going to talk about one particular one because they no longer exist, but ITT, there was still good learning that went on in there. And we need to see how we might be able to integrate that into our programs. But not say, oh, this was a for-profit company. All right. There are still many for-profit companies that could have and do have great learning that can be translated over. The accreditors need to ensure their standards are consistent. How do we recognize this? And this is the whole premise behind CPL practices. We need consistency. We need standardization so that we maximize and we don't devalue the integrity of the programs. And that final point, leveraging innovation. There are so many new things on the horizon. And I talked with a couple of different companies that are doing some amazing things with AI and how they're looking at credit for prior learning and evaluating it. So we need to engage those things. It will help accelerate. One case, I'll talk about this because it is a nonprofit and it is directly related to the military. ACE has an institutions page, which will allow you to share between like institutions how you evaluated a specific career field. Well, that's technology we need to incorporate.
Yeah, the military guide, I definitely don't think we can say enough about. I know it recently went through a little bit of an overhaul as well. So if it's been a while since you've checked that out, I think it's definitely worth getting reacquainted with it. The new interface, I think, is easy to use, and that benchmarking is so helpful to really be able to understand what other institutions have said different occupations are earning at their institution or being awarded.
Right. Excellent. Yep.
Speaking of, let's talk a little bit about military CPL.
Sure. So military CPL, the way this works is the American Council on Education will be invited to a military installation to evaluate a specific career field or a set of career fields, either their in-seat training that they do or the on-the-job training that they do. And these are the documents that you can see that come out of that. Those military training courses are typically just like any other military course or any other academic program because they have a syllabus. They call it a POI, and it's their program of instruction is what they call it. And that lists out exactly what they're going to teach. What are the requirements? We see a lot of Kolb-like cycle of experiential learning that is brought up in that. They've created their own little experiential learning model so that they can make sure that they're hitting the right training. Now, when ACE does an evaluation, the people who do it, it's a team. We go out or we are virtually connected, and The military brings all the information related to the course as it is taught, and we go through that material. Now, the people on those teams are all terminally degreed in their area of expertise. I am a faculty evaluator for ACE. I do leadership and management because that's what I teach. I teach leadership and management, so I can address those types of things that I see in a course, which a lot of times we don't see unless it's a professional development course in leadership and supervision and management. But you have to be terminally degreed and currently teaching in your area of expertise. So these individuals doing the evaluation are our faculty peers. And a lot of people don't realize that, that you could be if you are terminally degreed, and I want to make this pitch, consider joining the ACE faculty. There is a nominal honorarium that's paid when you go out and do one of these. I say nominal, it's $500 a day. I mean, I would take $500 a day over a sharp stick in the eye. And it gives you a chance to see how this is all done. So lots of documentation out there. ACE has been doing this kind of business since 1918. It started with the War Powers Act during World War I or at the end of World War I. Now, the occupational reviews, we go in and interview individuals that are in that workplace, and we ask them, generalize this across everyone that works in this field at this level. And that's how we make those determinations. So we spend time interviewing them, discussing, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Why should we consider this to be recognized as college equivalent learning? And we go through all that. I've been doing this since 2017. Got it down pretty good. I've probably done about 30 plus evaluations, and have also done some Air Force stuff. But the Air Force is different than all the rest of the branches, which we all already know that. They're a little weird, which is all right. It's a Fortune 500 company that.
Oh my gosh. Spoken like not an airman.
And I'm an airman, so I can say all these things. I did only 35 years in the Air Force. But the way the Air Force did it many years ago, they set up the community college of the Air Force. It is the world's largest community college, only because every airman that has gone in the military and gone to a tech school has completed some college that's recognized. And it is still, it's a college transcript because it is a college. It is SACS accredited with some credit for prior learning because of the on-the-job training, which a lot of colleges and universities see on the CCAF transcript. Journeyman and craftsman qualifications, that's really on the job training. And they need to see how they can apply that within their academic programs to complete that. These are just tools. These are all the things. Down in the middle, you see the ACE military guide. The easiest way to find it is in your browser, type ACE military guide, and it'll pop up.
I've also included a link to that. I answered a question by Janice about where to find that, and I included the link to the
Perfect.
ACE page on the military guide where you can see sort of their explanation about the suite of tools,
yep.
Who should be using what, and their resources.
Yes. I will also send out the link on how to use that institutions page. They have a 7-minute video that really kind of explains that and helps out. Now, before we move on, two things I want to talk about. The Joint Services Transcript is how ACE moves that information from their database into a college or university's transfer services program. But if you go through the ACE military guide, you can get what's called a course exhibit, which the transcript is individual. The course exhibit is for the job or for the training. It's not the individual. So it gives you a wider scope. It talks about learning outcomes. What are the expectations that they're going to be able to do once they complete this? This looks more like our statements on a syllabus. Okay.
So important to really understand this, I think, and we are hoping in the future to do a deeper dive on understanding the JST and how specifically that works in the world of credit for prior learning. We could certainly spend the remainder of our time today talking about this, but we want to get to the rest of it.
That's right.
But I think I'll just add that this is an area where a lot of institutions are not quite as strong as in other areas
Right.
of CPL. So I think if this is something that sounds maybe foreign or a little bit more complicated to you, you are not alone. I think this is something a lot of institutions are trying to get better at, or trying to grow, and trying to make sure that they're doing equitably. So that is a totally normal place to be, and we're excited to help where we can in that maturity.
And along with that, last year I worked with Dr. Kendra Pearson Winters at KCTCS,
Who's
and
on
we
the
did.
line, by the way, Dallas?
Oh, she is great. Hey, Kendra, good to see you. Not really see you, but to know that you're there. We did I think it was about an hour, maybe an hour and a half discussion with the KCTCS schools, colleges about the JST. And I'm more than happy to do that at any school that's interested. This is a service that we at CPE can offer to our colleges, and it's free. Free. If you want more, just let us know.
Thanks. Such a great pitch, Dallas. Kendra did ask Dallas if you happen to know if ACE has fixed the system level login issues, or if they still only have the individual college logins. This is an issue probably for our folks at KCTCS who have that sort of system level oversight.
Right. So one of the challenges is you have to be at a college to get this, college or university, an EDU site, because what they do is they appoint one person to be the focal point for that college, and then they can award out who can get in and how they can use it. They're still in the process. They're doing a pilot project in the SUNY area with Nan Travers and Empire State College to see how they can improve this and make it a systems level as opposed to just an individual institution. So great question. Thank you for sharing that. If you have any challenges with that, please feel free to give me a holler. There are some workarounds.
And then Janice also had a question, if there is a charge for access to the military guide, Dallas, and if there's like a membership that you need with ACE.
There is no charge for using the military guide. Anyone can use it. The institutions page, where you can share between institutions, is also free. This is what's very unique about this, is that it has been paid for by the Department of Defense, and they continue to promote this every year. There are ongoing evaluations. One thing to consider, though, if you're out there looking and you can't find one, that's probably because ACE hasn't evaluated it. The military has to invite ACE to come in and do the evaluation. Not all branches are as good as the Army in this area. The Army has had many career fields evaluated. The Marine Corps has had some. The Navy, not as many, but still applicable. Here's another nuance to it also, particularly in the medical area. All branches go to the same school to get the training. So it looks pretty consistent there. Everyone in medical goes to Fort Sam Houston to get their training down there for the combat medic, the Navy corpsman, all of this. So if you've got someone that has been to those schools, know that you're going to see a lot of consistency. So you can make one recommendation that can cover several branches. And the way to do this is in your transfer services. We did this at U of L with recruiters, but you can say, oh, you had the medical terminology, but you're a Navy person. Well, that's the same as the Air Force person that's had that same training, and the same as any Army person. So you can have one ACE number assigned, or multiple ACE numbers assigned to one course in your institution. It's kind of going deep there. I'm sorry. I get excited.
No, it's okay. It's hard to explain without really getting into the military guide itself, which maybe we'll have an opportunity to do in the future.
Sure.
But Janice does have one question about, and I want to make sure we're being really clear here. She says, how do you get the Joint Transcript Guide? So to be really clear, the JST is a transcript that an individual transitioning service member has. That is their record of training and like education. So they will bring that to, like, they would bring that with them, just like a transfer, like a transcript from a transfer institution that would be evaluated upon admission. What ACE publishes are sort of guides into how to interpret those, and the occupational guides that Dallas was talking about. So I just want to make sure we're really clear about what the different artifacts are that you're seeing on the screen.
Right. So that course exhibit is that latter part you were talking about. Way back in the day, ACE used to have two books One was silver, the other was gold. That one talked about classroom training, the other talked about the workplace learning. That's all online now. So that makes it easy. That's the military guide, and it's free to get you. Now, here's something else about the military guide. Not just the military guide, but ACE does this for civilian employers also. Dollar General. I think we have a slide later on for that. So that's the military side. Let's move along because
yeah, we're going to move along because otherwise we'll
don't.
spend all day here, which is great to know that there's appetite for more discussion around the military side of things, and we'll definitely spend some more time there in the future. But what you probably are familiar with are the options like what you see on your screen here.
Right. And these are all, they all have the potential for credit for prior learning. AP test, a lot of folks don't realize that, we can, a lot of students don't realize that they can use this. We understand this in academia, but the student doesn't get all the information sometimes that they can do this. The IB is not very popular, but there are some schools that use the International Baccalaureate programs. Another great way to recognize credit. One of the most popular, though, is the CLEP exam. And with the CLEP exam, college level exam program, this is the student says, I have the experience in this. I'm going to take a test, which will validate that I have the knowledge. And they typically have to score right in that 70 range. Colleges and universities can put their own level of what they expect from this. But here's the challenge that I see.
It's actually standardized in the state of Kentucky. CPE publishes guidelines on pass rates for CLEP exams, just like with AP exams. So if you aren't familiar with those in Kentucky, you can find those on the council's website. But we've taken care of some thresholds and cutoffs for you on that front.
Yeah, good. Excellent. So the one challenge I see, though, it's not clear on websites. You go to try to find it and it's not there. It's not been aligned with other like gen ed courses. A lot of these are gen ed level courses that you can use. So that's one of our challenges. But the bigger challenge is that next category, the Dante's subject standardized tests. And this DSST, there are 30 some out there, 38, I think, additional CLEP-like tests that you can take, but most colleges and universities have not been using DSSTs because for the longest time, DSSTs were only for military folks, but they've been opened for several years now to civilians to take these also. So consider integrating that into your academic program for credit for prior learning. This is that proficiency test that we're looking at and how they can accomplish that. So instead of just CLEP, you need to have CLEP DSSTs. And there's a fantastic website out there. Many of you know this, modernstates.org. For the military, they can take CLEP and Dante's or DSSTs for free. If an individual goes to modernstates.org, they can get a scholarship to take one to get reimbursed for the expenses. So
yeah, and it should be noted, if you're not familiar with these, there's usually a fee to sit the exam. And so there are lots of options like with Modern States or other even institutional scholarship programs. They'll have opportunities for students to get fee waivers for these exams or reduced fee exam fees.
Yep. So here's the other thing too. Guess who certifies College Board? Guess who certifies CLEP? Guess who certifies DSSTs? ACE, the American Council on Education. So they are the underlying assessors of the value of this learning. So ACE is tangled into all of this stuff all over the place. And they know their business. They really do. And they do a great job at educating their faculty evaluators to do wonderful work there. So, all right, let's move to the next one. So under that umbrella, some additional things that we see are proficiency in the area of proficiency credit are certificates and certifications. So there are industry certifications that individuals can get that can carry credit for prior learning. If you look at an organization like SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Managers, if you look at PMP, these are all ways of earning credit for certifications within the workplace. But then we also have industry training courses that have been evaluated by those third-party individuals that Amanda has talked about, which there are third parties that do CLEP-like exams. We're going to talk about those in a minute too. But there's the National College of Credit Recommendation Services. It is not ACE. It is a competitor for ACE, but there's some great things in there, and they have the same process as ACE. The difference between the two, ACE is the military side plus civilian. National College Credit is pretty much strictly civilian, some federal government, a lot of state government, and it's a lot smaller in scope. So just knowing that, there are great opportunities. The 2 pages I've selected here, one of them is for ACE, and my eyesight is killing me here, but it's the Microsoft cluster of training that can be, credit has been recognized in these areas. One that I really like to talk about a lot is Coursera has had several things evaluated for Google IT and Google courses also, and they are in that ACE National Guide. So again, if you want to find it, ACE National Guide in your browser, it should pop right up. You can go through there. You'll find a lot of stuff.
Thanks. Dallas, I think this is another area that is getting more and more popular. I know there are some states like Ohio that are really running with this from a statewide perspective and wanting to really invest in clearer, like more transparency with
Right.
which workplace certifications can carry credit for prior learning. There's always going to be individual ones that will be evaluated one-off by an institution, but I think there's a lot of interest by a lot of states in really thinking about what are the big certifications that are held by lots of folks in industry and how can we really make that clear, just like the military, how that would easily translate into your progress in a post-secondary institution. So I think we're going to start to see a lot more conversation here nationally in the next couple of years.
I agree. And this is where we can really help workforce by helping them take their current certifications within their jobs, ASE, automotive services. I forget what the E stands for. Those can be translated in. But when an organization does some kind of training internally, if they give us a chance to work with them from academia, then we can say, if you just tweak this a little bit more, this could be college equivalent learning. And one of those examples would be Dollar General. So every store manager at Dollar General goes through a 1-year training, and ACE evaluated that for them. They recognized 9 hours of learning in management, retail sales, retail operations. We can do other things, which I think we're going to talk about this more, but realtor's license, 80 hours of training and a certification test. We can recognize the learning that goes on there, but it has to be evaluated. And we can help those organizations by saying, this is what we're looking for. And the biggest challenge is assessment. How is the learning assessed? Well, if there's a certification test, then it works.
Speaking of, let's talk about some of those assessments.
Sure. So lots of different ways to do this. Again, I've got the umbrella down there for us to see how we've transitioned from transfer credit, military credit, and now into the proficiency credit as far as institutionally developed exams. So we as schools will have challenge exams. You can test out of computer skills. That was one that was really popular a while back. Now it's an expectation that you have computer skills, but there's still some that are doing that, particularly in the business arena, or maybe in English. You can test out of English. Those are institutionally developed, managed, and then offered by that school. The challenge is, how do we, someone transfers from one school to another, how do we take that credit for prior learning and recognize it in a way that it's easier to be accepted by the gaining institution? A lot of work going on in that area. So excited to see how we're going to use technology to do that. Another way that institutions can develop an exam is the skills demonstration. This is where you do something hands-on. It allows you to not necessarily use a paper and pen exam, but to say, here's the proficiency that I have by showing it. One case that we often use when I'm out teaching for Cale is in an automotive program. Can a person do a skills demonstration on how to change brakes? Most definitely. All right. They can either come in and do it in person, or they can use it through a Zoom observation or Teams or whatever platform you're using. This really became prevalent during COVID. My wife was teaching at BCTC. They had clinical exams they had to do, but because of COVID, they couldn't be in person. They were doing it over Zoom. It works. It's just we need to think about how to make it happen. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention, Dallas, I think this is really where the like connection with the learning outcomes comes into play,
Mhm.
right? So really, what is it that you're expecting a student to be able to do, to be able to demonstrate at the conclusion of a course? And then how are we translating that into how would this student demonstrate that proficiency, skill, learning, knowledge?
Mhm.
So really well developed, well written student learning outcomes lend themselves nicely to understanding how to really apply a credit for prior learning to a course.
Right, right. And that leads us into the next one, the oral interview. There are many ways to accomplish assessment. This one, it's not as popular as it could be. I think there are more opportunities that we could do this. Interestingly, there's a company out there that is doing certifications for resiliency. And instead of a pencil and paper test, they're doing oral interviews to assess an individual's understanding of the learning to award the credential. So, how can we do the same thing within our departments? Well, one of those ways might be oral interviews for interpersonal communication, presentations, public speaking, all of these things. Because if you talk with someone, how do you do this? What are the things that you use to manage the learning environment? Those are all things that can be discussed, and we can validate it because the oral interview is an examination. That's what we're doing. The last one there, the learning portfolio. Wow, this is
A lot to unpack here. Yeah.
a lot, and we have 10 minutes, so let's.
Another one, maybe just a disclaimer then, another one that we could spend a whole hour talking about and maybe we'll do in the future, but I think maybe we'll just clarify a little bit about what this actually means and how, like, what the process is to compile an portfolio. And then maybe we can dive into this more in the future.
Yeah, I think that would really be a good idea because there is so much to it. Kale does a 8 hour seminar on portfolio and all of this. We're doing it in less than an hour, so it's pretty interesting because with that learning portfolio, this is where a lot of misconception comes into play. I'm going to write a letter and I'm going to talk about in this portfolio all the great things that I've done. Well, no, it's a little bit more detailed than that. Kale came out with a book called Earning Credit for What You Know, and it lays out how to build a portfolio program. And in that, when we do portfolios, it is a demonstration of the learning that you've accomplished in either a nonprofit, a volunteer role, or in a workplace opportunity. And it can go as far as maybe a hobby. For example, if someone is a Civil War enthusiast, maybe they know it so well that they really don't need to take a history class on the Civil War. And we can recognize that. And we can do one of two things. You can do a course by course. If there's a course out there that already exists, and this is the way I prefer to do it, then that person who wants to petition for credit for that course through a portfolio would look at the syllabus and say, okay, here are the learning outcomes. Now, this means we have to write good learning outcomes, okay, which is another discussion that we need to have. But the learning outcomes say you need to know this, 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 and this. All right. After taking this course, these are the things you would know. If they can address 80% of those learning outcomes, then why would we not recognize that as credit for prior learning and award the credit? But there's a pattern to it. And in that pattern, we have to explain how we got the learning, what were the sources of the learning, and then provide artifacts. What artifacts are just the evidence, okay? Either certifications, job-related certifications, website, Microsoft. Every time you complete a Microsoft course, you get a certificate. Well, that says you've completed the training because you passed the assessment. All those artifacts that say, here's what you do. Another artifact could be a video presentation on where you went and did something. For example, another course by course interpersonal communication one that I like to use is Toastmasters. A lot of folks aren't familiar with Toastmasters, but what they do is they help people to become better public speakers. It's very rigorous. And if you go through their program, they're going to really challenge you on public speaking and how to do it. That's what it's all about. It's public speaking. You could take a video from one of those events and use that as one of your source documents to verify that you've met the course requirements. Now, the other way to do a learning portfolio is the block. And the block says that you're going to identify a list of skills. And based on that list of skills and the learning that you've had, credit will be awarded. Now, we have one college that I know of here, two, maybe three colleges here in Kentucky that do that. They write a portfolio and then they assign it to a portfolio credit course that allows the individual to recognize many credit hours. U of L, for example, does up to 48 hours of workplace learning or workplace training in that block credit. So it's a block of credit. It can be used predominantly for general education. Sometimes it can be used for a specific course. Wow. Okay, I did that as quick as I could.
You did great, Dallas, and so much more to say here. And I think if this is something that's really of interest to folks, if they could really let us know, that would be helpful so that we can dive deeper here, and also worth getting to know what your own institutional practices are around portfolios. And you may find that they vary from department to department, or that who is in charge of reviewing them varies, and then maybe what their approach to it is also, which is normal, but also gets back to our like standardization and clarity and transparency part. If you think that might be confusing for you, it's probably also confusing for your students. So
right.
I'll just throw that out there.
Yes, yes. Okay, we are coming to the end.
Yeah, so just to wrap up, I think one of the things that we really wanted to highlight by launching this webinar series is that this is beginning to gain momentum nationally, internationally, and it's certainly something that we want to bring to the forefront here in Kentucky, that credit for prior learning is rigorous, it is valid, it is important, and it is in service to our adult learners who carry life experience and college level learning with them, and us being able to really think about meeting them where they are and recognizing their experience with credit where appropriate is something that's going to be continually important for us as we engage this population of learners. Lisa, I just saw in the chat, asked if there was a recording available for the last webinar. There is. I will make sure to email folks that registered for this the link to where you can access the materials. But we actually talk in detail in the last webinar about trends around adult learners in the state of Kentucky and why it is important to begin thinking about these innovations and changes in the way that we do these things to engage adult learners more strategically.
Let me throw in there for just a second about the comment on the last webinar. So I shared it with some of my Kale friends and they really liked it. And Amanda, you don't know this, but I got an email this morning that they're doing a blog on the Kale website about our video and the discussion that went on. It's listed there. So we're getting some press.
Amazing.
What's that?
And Heather, who is our amazing technology guru running everything behind the scenes, actually just dropped the link, the YouTube link to the recording of our last webinar in the Q&A. So you can take a look. If you're also wanting that link, you can look for Lisa's question at the bottom of the Q&A, and Heather just dropped the link in there. So thank you, Heather. You're amazing. What else, Dallas, did you want to add before we move to what's next?
Right. Well, the workforce initiatives, one thing I want to highlight at JCC, we are using the TRAINS program. JCTC, yes. I'm sorry. This shows my old schoolness. Okay.
It's not 1997 anymore, Dallas. Come on.
We're taking the professional development training that we're doing with some employers using TRAINS to help in the funding, but we're recognizing that for credit for prior learning. And here's just another way that we can engage workforce in a new way to do great learning. So lots of opportunities there. And we need to showcase what we're doing here in Kentucky. There are some great things we're doing. but they're in stovepipes, and we need to break down those stovepipes, those silos, and say, here it is. Let's all do this, because really, there are more than enough learners for us to engage post-traditional adult learners. There's plenty of work for all of us. All right.
Yeah, and I do want to add in that vein, if you are doing something amazing at your institution or on Credit for Prior Learning, please let us know. This is actually what our third webinar in the series is going to focus on: good national and state level practices that are going on with Credit for Prior Learning. But Dallas and I are not everywhere. We don't know everything. And it's highly likely that you're doing something really cool at your institution that we don't know about. So if you think you have a really good, really strong, even if it's in working in isolation, even if it's just for one program, around Credit for Prior Learning or helping to support transitioning military service members into your institution, please let us know. I think you got an email from me reminding you about this webinar, so you can always shoot me back there. Or Dallas, I don't know if you want to drop your email into the chat so people could follow up with you. But we want to know about it. And then there's a couple of upcoming conferences that Dallas is really interested in that he wanted to share with you.
So CCME is the College on, or the Council on College and Military Educators, a great place to go to learn all things. All the key players in the DoD, DOL, DOE are there, and you can hear some wonderful things. It's just a horrible place to go this year, Aurora, Colorado, and it's just right outside of Denver. It's a hard trip. The NASPA folks are coming to Louisville. Both of these conferences are at the same time. So pick one or the other. Louisville's a lot closer. And
probably not as cold.
Great stuff there too. Yeah. And then going back to sharing with us, we are going to do the last of the 3 series webinars that we're doing on best practices in Kentucky and national, okay, and across the nation. So share with us. We need to know so we can share what you're doing with others, and we can work together and do great things. Okay, and I think that's our last slide, isn't it? The last one's questions.
No, I think this is the last slide. I'll just go back to the second bullet here, which is around the community of practice, which is one of the things we wanted to do with this webinar series is really gauge the appetite and what interest and needs that you have as the community. So please do feel free to connect with Dallas and follow up if you want to learn more about a specific topic area, or again, you feel like you're really strong in a certain area, so that he knows where to best direct our resources. I think on that note, I'll just add that I am actually transitioning out of my role at CPE, so you will not see me on the next webinar, but Dallas will be carrying this work forward and showcasing those amazing practices in Kentucky and across the nation on our December webinar. We will also be continuing this conversation at CPE's February Student Success Summit. We will have time dedicated to Credit for Prior Learning on both days. We will be bringing in a national expert to help talk about the context for this movement nationally and some really incredible practices and resources that Nan Travers from Empire State is going to be bringing to us. So just wanted to spotlight that you'll be hearing more from CPE about the Student Success Summit in February. But if you are thinking about attending that, it'll be hosted at Western Kentucky University. Dallas will be there, and we will have a whole track focused on Credit for Prior Learning.
And 2 things I'd like to add there. Nan Travers is the expert internationally. I mean, she's amazing. I hope one day to grow up and be like Nan, okay? Because she is so awesome. And the other thing, you are going to be missed, Amanda. You have done tremendous work.
Oh.
You have done what I had hoped would happen in Kentucky. You have put CPL on the map with CPE, and you are going to be greatly missed. So I know you're going to do amazing things where you're headed, and we wish you the very best, but I'm not really happy that you're leaving, okay?
Oh, Dallas, you're so kind. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. But the important thing here is the work on Credit for Prior Learning, which is going to continue, and Dallas is going to continue to do great work and lead a great conversation and that community of practice that we hope to form coming out of the spring summit. So we really hope that you'll continue to engage with CPE in this conversation and with this work, and let us know how we can best support you. But we are now 1 minute over 11, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up here. But Dallas's email is in the chat, and feel free to connect with us and follow up. And thank you so much for being here. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Amanda.